is everyone here so old? I'm just wondering, like, where's all the young?
I work for the Board of Elections, and that's all you see.
Why is that? Where's all the young people? I counter-protested a couple weeks ago. There was one of that rat person, Charlie Kirk. I went and counter-protested there, and everyone there was so young. They were so young, a lot of beautiful people. And then I come here, and I went to another ones, and everyone's just old.
Don't say that like
Why is that? I'm just wondering, why is it all the old people are at these, and all the young, beautiful people are at his? Why is that?
He did better, whatever.
He did better. We got to figure out what he was doing.
No kings! No kings! No kings! No kings! No kings! No kings!
8647, So, although liberal media is desperately trying to paint yesterday's No Kings protest as a massive political success for the Democrat Party, they're running into a very fundamental problem, which is the question of where are the young voters? Why were there virtually none of them in attendance at any of these events? And keep in mind, when I say young voters, I'm not just referring to Gen Z, although that's extremely relevant considering Democrats always claim to be the party of the youth and the future, and yet where is the youth or the future? But I'm even just referring to people under the age of 50, because you take a look at most of these videos and it's basically become a meme at this point that the entire thing looks like it came right out of the nursing home. As a matter of fact, we even have conservative baby boomers claiming they're now going to start identifying as Gen Z to not identify with these absolute clowns and morons, and I can completely feel that sentiment. Although for the Democrat Party, despite the fact they're going to make excuses or celebrate this fact because, oh, old people, they vote more, and I understand that's true. But you also have to understand that what this represents is a ticking time bomb for the Democrat Party, which is ironic because that used to be what Democrats believed would happen to the Republicans. As a matter of fact, they're not very coy about this. Mainstream thought of the Democrat Party for a very long time was that when the older, whiter generation basically passes along, you're going to see a surge of younger voters who have all been indoctrinated and are heavily left-wing, as well as the minority groups and a lot of the immigrant populations that we've brought into the country. And yet in 2024, almost all of those trends reverse, right? You actually saw boomers kind of go a little bit to the left, right? It's basically the vote split like 50-50 there, which usually Republicans were winning boomers by a lot more. But the gains were carried by younger populations in this country, right? Gen X went way to the right, and, those are kind of like the actual core Republican base, the middle-aged people. But particularly what was really interesting and where Democrats collapsed because they could not run up the margins was the fact that basically Gen Z and Latino voters split 50-50, which is unprecedented in modern politics, right? Gen Z is currently on pace to be the most conservative young generation since 1988. And so now that the shoe is on the other foot, you see them making desperate excuses. Oh, it's actually a good thing that we as the Democrats can only draw old white people nowadays. Wait, what? And by the way, does that not prove simply that your entire political coalition from 2008 has utterly collapsed and like all you're left with is the Woodstock Americans, who are still trying to live through that? And then on the question of where exactly were the young people yesterday, well, we'll tell you about that as well. So guys, we'll get into it. First though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work and ensure that we can keep doing these videos. And that said, you can just already see some of the excuse making from liberal media figures like Mehdi Hasan. Because Mehdi Johnson points out, I've seen dozens of videos and I'm convinced there's not a single person under 50 at these No Kings protests. And that's true. That's incredibly rare. As a matter of fact, the only people under 50 were like right-wing trolls going to, mess with them and ask them questions about very basic things like what is a king, what is fascism, and none of them can answer. But of course, he's responding saying, Republicans are now complaining about old white people. Now I've seen everything, lol. Now just understand, we're not quote-unquote complaining about old white people. As a matter of fact, we understand there's plenty of old white people who are Republican or conservative or Trump voters. And nor are we complaining about it. We're actually laughing at this fact because we understand that the Democrat Party is basically at this point just a last gasp of like what is fundamentally a dying political movement and ideology. And that is represented by the fact that, you know, this is the entire crowd. And you, Mehdi, claim to be this like grassroots upstart progressive and blah, blah, blah. And yet your fans, the people who show up to see you speak, because you did speak at a No Kings rally, look like that. Yeah, I think you're the one who needs to be self-reflecting on what exactly happened to our political appeal. Very interesting. Now, that said, perhaps the most iconic moment of this all is in reference to the No Kings rally in Boston, where NBC had this to say about the age demographics of the crowd in attendance.
People I know who are there, this is an older crowd. There's not a lot of folks, and granted, it's a big crowd here. I'm not good at estimating, but it's definitely over 2,000, maybe close to 3,000. We can't see everyone, but it's an older crowd. A lot of white hair. You see out there Q-tips, as we used to call them in the business. And they're out protesting, and not a lot of young people. And also, again, portraying this I hate America idea that this is what this protest is about, showing people who are boomers and middle-aged out taking time from their day on a Saturday to come and protest and be heard at the nation's oldest public park, Boston Common.
Right, so even the dollar store Rachel Maddow there had to admit, not a lot of young voters in attendance. Isn't that interesting? By the way, I would like to add a new contender to hilarious No Kings geriatric protesters, and that's none other than Nancy Pelosi, who posted this atrocity yesterday. Check it out.
I'm going to tear up the crown.
Yeah, what else can we say? Yet another geriatric No Kings protester who is 80 plus years old and doesn't know when to quit. Many such cases. Although I have to say, Nancy Pelosi might be the exact embodiment of everything we're talking about when it comes to this question of why is there a certain subset of the baby boomers, not all of them. I would basically divide it between the Woodstock Americans and the Americans who went to Vietnam. But why is this like 49 to 50%, according to the 2024 exit polls, suddenly shifting so hard to the left? And why are they the only ones out there protesting Trump these days? And I think the establishment politician who's been in office for like 1,000 years and doesn't know when to quit is really the greatest example of that, which is you have a lot of these people. I mean, some say the answer is as simple as they watch a lot of mainstream media. And because they're, you know, baby boomers, the ones who have the most TV. And while I think there's a lot of truth in that, I don't think it's the only explanation. I think there's another aspect of this, which is that when you're talking about older people, especially, you know, the boomers economically, socioeconomically speaking, kind of had it the best of any generation in America because they got to grow up in the post-World War II prosperity, that a lot of them kind of are in this camp of they don't understand why things have to change or what's actually like wrong with the country, right? They sort of live in an insulated bubble in a sense, I guess you could say. And it's further interesting that, you know, you're talking about a lot of these older folks are the same ones who were Republicans back during the George Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney era, right? You know, that's actually like proven by the polls, and a lot of them will tell you it directly, right? These are the type of people who, like the Lincoln Project, for example, is supposed to appeal to, which is to say, first of all, they were always on the wrong side of history. I mean, how royally can you screw up a country inheriting that from the greatest generation and saying, I'm going to vote for like the worst neocon Republicans possible. And then when those neocon Republicans are scared into the out of the GOP by Donald Trump, I'm going to go over to the Democrat Party and then embrace the radical, crazy nonsense of today. But the reason I'm bringing this all up is to make the point that do you notice that every single time when push comes to shove, though these people think that they're revolutionaries and though they think it's still 1969 in their heads, they always politically vote and support the status quo, right? When the neocon Republicans were the establishment, they were neocon Republicans. When the neocon Republicans became Democrats, they went over and supported now the Democrat status quo. And I think it's really a situation where, again, you know, you're talking about like a lot of wealthy, privileged baby boomers who do this type of stuff, you know, they whine and scream about Social Security, but they're like living off of a giant pension that has nothing to do with Social Security. And they probably have multiple properties and all this stuff, right? Especially the ones up in like Martha's Vineyard who are protesting. Really? You mean to tell me Social Security is a pressing issue in your life? No, these are fundamentally selfish and naive people who basically, again, live in these insulated bubbles. They had it good in this country, and so they don't understand, for instance, what younger generations from Gen X all the way to Gen Z basically are feeling and seeing all around them, right? They scream things like, diversity is our strength, because they remember how motivated they felt back in the day when LBJ passed the 1965 Immigration Act and all that stuff, not knowing, of course, what the actual migration crisis is doing to the United States of America. Why? Because they don't even live around it, right? So again, they can talk all they want about how, we care about the younger generations, But of course, what do? They grew up in a great country, and instead of doing one simple effort to preserve any aspect of that for the future generations beyond them, again, these selfish, spoiled people basically just said, we're going to let this all go to crap. We're going to have safeguard for this for us and screw basically everyone else, And because even look back then, right? What were these people doing? Well, a bunch of the rest of their people in the generation were off fighting the Vietnam War. What are they doing? They're smoking weed at Woodstock. And then they're saying, or they're like Jane Fonda, right? Going to go live with the North Vietnamese. And then they're going to turn around and pretend like they've ever contributed anything good to the history of America. Absolutely not. That said, I want to show you what actual young people were doing yesterday in the United States of America, because they were not seen at the No Kings protest. But you see this image right here from the Texas A&M and Arkansas game, where apparently a huge part of the Arkansas student section started putting on crowns as a rebellion against No Kings Day. As a matter of fact, I forgot to turn on the crown for this video. I mean, every No Kings theme protest, I feel like we ought to have that there. And of course, you could simply write that off saying, well, it's the SEC, but I'd like to point out, Democrats claim there were protests in all 50 states, yet young voters didn't show up in any of the 50 states. Why? Because they were here instead. First of all, being normal social human beings, they said, we want to spend our Saturday enjoying a great American tradition instead of just screaming, Donald Trump, out in the streets, and then claiming, obviously alongside a bunch of like geriatrics, because that's so cool and hip to do, right? Everyone wants to do that, right? But anyways, again, no, it's emblematic of a greater nationwide trend, obviously, that you're seeing. And of course, meanwhile, what are the old people doing out in the streets? Take a listen to this.
Recently, with Charlie Kirk being assassinated,
He's a piece of garbage. Of course we were mean. I am so tired of people saying, oh, but, it's a terrible thing. No, Hitler is dead. I'm glad Hitler's dead.
Something that I've heard in interviewing Republicans is that they're concerned with the health care going to undocumented immigrants. What would you say about that?
I don't know that it's true. Everybody deserves health care, and we can certainly afford it in this country. So again, they're just, they're pointing to things and saying it's our fault, we're too liberal. Yeah, it's really depressing. I don't know how anybody your age even thinks of having children, okay? Okay, millions of Democrats did not vote. Whose fault is that?
Right, so keeping on our theme of the utter selfishness and sabotaging behavior of the future by these liberal baby boomers, notice she, first of all, celebrates the death of Charlie Kirk, okay, who had a huge impact, obviously, on younger generations, and you would have to venture to guess she feels the same way about his young supporters, because after all, if they're all Nazis, then the Nazis need to be dead, according to these people's logic. So, not only do you want the world to be worse for the people who come after you, you actively want them to be dead. I mean, what a telling, reflection of the legacy people like this have left in the United States of America. And it is not a good one. Let me just say that it is not a good one. And of course, right, advocating, by the way, to bankrupt the country for future generations, saying we should absolutely have free healthcare for illegal aliens. Oh, well, what if people actually need to use healthcare who are American citizens? Screw them, right? We don't care about that. Oh, money is free. That's how it was basically when I was born, so therefore it must still be true today. Utterly ridiculous, utter selfishness. These people, there is no bound to which they know of destroying the future of a great country that they were born in. It is truly something, frankly, that needs to be studied. And yet, amid all of this ridiculous behavior, this week, people on CNN were trying to defend the foolishness of the No Kings protest, but it didn't go so well. Take a listen.
Perhaps maybe in Congress, but we know that won't happen because they aren't even working right now. But people are protesting Americans being zip-tied, being detained without having their rights protected. I'm not saying that is not that is not the Democratic Party saying that let all illegal people or criminals run free. That is not what the Democratic Party is saying.
Those are the policies. Those are your.
No, they are not.
I mean, you have prosecutors and judges all over this country that have let violent criminal after violent criminal out on the streets, and then what do? They commit other violent crimes in city after city after city.
What does that have to do with people exercising their rights to protest? I really want to understand. I mean, there are going to be millions of people probably out on the streets all over the country. And many of those people are, your neighbors, perhaps some of your friends. They're regular Americans that have constitutional rights, that have voting rights like everybody else. Why is it that there is this idea that guilt by association should be applied to them when they just want to go out and protest against a political administration that they disagree with?
I have no problem with people protesting peacefully. They have every right to do that. I do think it's legitimate.
Why demonize them?
Because I think it's a legitimate political debate about what they're protesting for.
I mean, look, listen, if every time, and this does happen on the right, on the left to some extent. So, conservatives get mad when Democrats say, oh, you guys are palling around with white supremacists and racists and so on and so forth. Charlottesville, a great example.
Or the group chat.
Yeah, the group chat.
This week.
January 6th, all of that. Everybody painted with the same brush, and you all were opposed and upset about that. Why are you applying then that same thing in this situation?
Again, if they want to protest peacefully, that's perfectly fine. It is perfectly legitimate political debate for Republicans to say, what exactly are they protesting? They are mad that Donald Trump is enforcing federal immigration law. They are mad that he is lawfully exercising the powers of the presidency. And they are fighting for policies that Republicans fundamentally believe are bad
I
for
do
the
think
country.
they disagree.
Yeah, what a low IQ excuse from Abby Phillip, by the way. I mean, what kind of argument is that? They're protesting. They're practicing their First Amendment right. So why are you criticizing them? Because it's also in your First Amendment right to criticize protesters? I don't understand. I know for a fact that Democrats believe the First Amendment only applies to speech that is liberal or pro-Democrat, but that's not how it actually works, first of all. Secondly, the criticism exactly is what? Oh, millions of people are going to be out in the streets, so, therefore they're good. Hey, baby boomers, you should know this term because you grew up in the Cold War. You ever heard of the term useful idiot? That's exactly what millions of Americans were yesterday for the Bolshevik, pro-communist, Antifa-infiltrated Democrat Party that we've been talking about that is ultimately sponsoring and leading this nonsense.
Well, the answer is they're useless to us, but they are useful to other people. That's the point. People called useful idiots are people who are sufficiently naive or ill-informed to be able to be manipulated for propaganda purposes. The expression useful idiots was used of Westerners who supported communism. There's a lovely old story saying it was coined by Vladimir Lenin. Unfortunately, Lenin died in 1924. The expression doesn't turn up till 1948, so it can't come from Lenin. But it was certainly a Cold War expression for Westerners who supported the communist Soviet regime.
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. This is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards.
But I do have to say, it is a sign of true political desperation when you cannot actively defend a protest movement to simply sit there and say, oh, but that's their free speech. Like, you can say that about basically anyone who's advocating for anything. You can say that about the KKK. You can say that about David Duke. You can say that about neo-Nazis. Simply saying they're exercising their free speech does not make them like good or virtuous in any way whatsoever. But needless to say, the movement here largely falling apart. The useful idiots completely failed and humiliated themselves yesterday. And essentially, guys, there you have it. By the way, we'd just like to point out, lastly here, you know, a lot of the useful idiots in the streets today were the same useful idiots in the 1960s. I'm just saying, you think about that for a second. You're like, wow. Again, really going on this theme. The people who destroyed America for generations on end, right there, okay, in their final days, still destroying America yet again. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.